We've reached one of the key points of the season, Gary, where we're 10 games into the season and it's time to take stock at football clubs up and down the land. It's time for the 10-game review. How have you found this over the seasons that you've been working as a manager? What goes into it?
Well, everyone speaks about 10 games, Dave, don't they? But that's a fair reflection on what the league looks like now. When you're 4 or 5 games in, of course, certain things can shape where you are in the league and how you start the season. But I think 10 games starts to be enough of a sample size to look at many, many things. It's that second international break, but as a manager, you're trying to get to for one way or another. One way of looking at it is if you win and are going well, you've now got 2 weeks to relax in an important part of the season. The flip side to it is if you're not going well and maybe you've lost just before the international break, then all eyes are on you and everyone has a chance for 2 weeks to debate whether or not this is a time to perhaps move on in a different direction. And you see lots of clubs. It's a bit of a benchmark, I think, for all of those little caveats within the game that of course we would both be looking at, with excitement, hopefully.
We hope we're in a positive position, but we've come through preseason, and by the end of preseason, everybody's hoping for a solid start to the season, aren't they? They want to get off to a good start, get some early wins in, and start seeing how the team forms. And often you'll hear managers in that period talk about needing the team to gel for the cohesion to start to come together. So, is 10 games enough for that to start to have presented itself, or are we starting to look a little bit too early, or is it more than enough time? In which case, if you're not performing, the review is kind of a little bit more pointed.
Yeah, I think it depends on the previous season and how long you've been at the club and what are the expectations of the team. We've been at clubs before where you finish the season strongly and you start the season okay. Well, no one gets too excited, no one gets too down. No, everyone's kind of like, okay, it's a solid start, but let's see how the next 10 games go, for
Yeah.
example. So and then we've been at other clubs where maybe you finish the season poorly, and there's an expectation of you need to start well. You need to start well. You need to maybe give the fans that feeling of positivity and belief leading into the sort of second quarter of the season, if you like, and so therefore I think there's different. I don't think there's one size fits all. I think there's very different views on it. But I think if you can get off to a reasonable start, again, historically, what has your team done? When we were at Millwall, the team were always a team that started quite slowly and finished the season strongly. So, a slow start to Millwall this season isn't perhaps looked in the same way as maybe someone else who, would be expected to be right up there. And like a Luton, for example, if you're Luton, you probably haven't got that many points less than Millwall, but the expectation is very, very different. I'm just using those two as an example. So, but I think there's also lots of other ways in which you can measure yourself for 10 games. We would sit there in the office, wouldn't we, after sort of game 8, 9 and 10, and you're starting to shape your feelings around how does the team feel this season? Do we feel
Yeah.
like we're just lacking something? Do we feel like the players that we've signed in the summer have settled in well? Are we excited thinking actually that there feels like something's really good with a team and a new signing started really well, scored a few goals and you're excited for what's to come? Or are you thinking actually we've got a lot of work to do? So, we've both been in that situation, haven't we, with the team where you're not too sure sometimes and 10 games is enough to see bits, but maybe not shape the whole feeling.
Yeah, it's certainly by that second international break and we're 10 games in, one thing's for sure, we're either fit enough for the season or, as you say, we've got a lot more work to do and we've got to cram it in. And that's not a good situation to be, certainly from the physical performance side, is it? That you're looking around thinking, oh, we're not up to pace now. We've probably been fortunate, or we've been doing it long enough to know how to get teams fit, ready to play. But you see that sometimes with teams, don't you? You just think these are not up to the speed of the division. Essentially, as the division gets faster and faster each year, you got to keep up with it, haven't you? And some of those reviews obviously focus on how the team is playing, but also you're looking maybe at, is the team fit enough? Are the players robust enough? Because there's one thing that's sure to kind of knock you off the rails is losing a lot of players, and especially key players, to injuries, which look like they're down maybe to a lack of conditioning.
Yeah, I think that's always a hard one, isn't it? I mean, I suppose it would worry me after 10 games if a manager. Look, managers all do the same things, don't they? We've all done the same, like you'll have done the same within meetings. I've done the same, where sometimes you have a feeling of just protecting yourself a little bit. So, but it would always, well, a little bit.
Never happened.
A lot, Dave. Yeah, no, but we would, wouldn't we? That's just how it happens, doesn't it? But it would worry me after 10 games if a manager's saying, "Oh, maybe we're not quite fit enough." Or to me, that's an easy thing to blame. I think that's something that you're looking for something to perhaps distract the fans. Our squad's not thick enough, or we haven't got enough players, or the quality. So I think sometimes you have to accept that wherever you are is where you are, and you want to send positive messages to the players rather than sort of things that maybe protect you as a manager or as staff to maybe buy you the next 10 games. And we all know that goes on, and we all know sometimes that's shaped. I mean, there's a few things, isn't there? When you come out of pre-season into the first batch of games, of course, nothing hits like a league game, does it? We spoke about it with
Nope.
players before. Not like you can be as fit as you like, you can do all the best work, you can have the players. We finished pre-seasons thinking we're going into the season and we feel very, very strong. And then players after 2 or 3 games are like, I just can't find my rhythm and that happens a lot, doesn't it? With players. Then you start getting 5, 6, 7 games into a season. You'd expect most of the players to find their feet. Of course, there'd be some still a little bit lacking in game time, and like you say, with the volume that you've often achieved by that point to get that fitness level, you might have had a few casualties along the way, and that can shape the first 10 games, can't it? You get 2 key injuries to 2 key players, all of a sudden, that is a massive impact. If you think about, say, a derby, say we lose Matty Vidra in that playoff season for 10 games, that is going to, of course, you've got other players, but that is going to have a massive, massive impact on your season. Millwall, we lost Brad as the second game of the season in the Cup. So suddenly you're now going another 6 games without one of your key players. And I think it's interesting when you look about, of course, that's why you build a squad. And of course, that's why you have to have multiple options and you have to be able to carry that. But at the same time, we all know, and we've worked in it long enough, that 1 or 2 things can actually start to affect the morale of the other players, even so early in the season. We've seen it so often, haven't we?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I suppose ironically we're talking about Brado's there, and then the following season, or was it the season before? I can't remember which way around it was, but we lost Zian Fleming to an innocuous tackle on his debut, and then we lose him for a period. And then you look back at the end of the season, you see how effective he was when he came back. Maybe the actual break allowed him to get stronger and prepare better, but also when he scored 15 goals as a attacking midfielder or forward, and you think, well, what else would he have done if he had the additional time when he was out injured? Like, would he have gone on to score 20 or even more? Would it have propelled us a little bit higher up the league earlier? And that then starts to shape thoughts around what's going to come, isn't it? So you're at that 10-game mark. If it's going well, you're starting to think, right, how do I add to this in order to push on even further? Or the other way is you're 10 games in, it's not going too well, and you're kind of looking around for the life raft. What we got to do here to stop this ship from sinking, or potentially, how do I get off the ship?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've had buckets out chucking water over the sides a few times, haven't we? So
Bailing,
we never had
bailing for all our life is worth.
too expensive. We've never had the budget for a life raft. We've always just had buckets, holes in. So we've done a good job with those buckets, Dave, haven't we? Well, yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I look back to different seasons where I can remember, a season at Burton where I think the season that I left to Birmingham, we'd won something like 7 out of the first 9 games. And you're sat there and you're thinking, we have got a good team. You can just feel it, and you can feel the team, you can feel the signings, you can just see we've got this right. We've had other seasons where we've signed players from, say, a European club, and remember Casper in the first game for Millwall away at Middlesbrough,
Yeah,
and terrific player. We had great hopes for him, but culturally not played in English football before, and he was a fit lad, wasn't he? And he spoke to us about his previous coach and how they'd ran and they were so fit and the distances they were doing and the volume. Yet he gets to 60 minutes of a championship match and he's looking over at you thinking, "Well, I need help, Dave. Help me. Can you get me 2 new quads, Dave?" I think it was the translation. Um, but that's what you get, don't you? Then we've had Derby 10 games. I remember the first full season at Derby, if you remember. I think we were 10 games in and we hadn't started particularly well. And I think we had Forest at home in a match on Sky. And
yeah,
I remember thinking, whether that was just me, but it felt externally, it was like, you got to win this game. You lose to your local rivals, you lose in a derby
yeah.
match, you could be done. And I think we scored after 30 seconds, and almost like the relief of that goal was like, wow, we're all right here. And then you kick on, and we ended up in the playoffs. So it shows you the first 10 games also don't shape your season. They shape how you feel at the start of the season, but of course they don't shape your season. So I think there's very different. Think back to that Casper one. What challenges do we have with from a physical perspective? Do we have with you could try and move the team forward by signing, let's say, Zian at Millwall, Zian, Vogie, Casper, Kifton Belt at Birmingham. How does that impact the start to a season? Because those players might need some time to get used to the intensity, don't they?
Yeah, going back to the Casper situation, that day at Middlesbrough, I think it's the only example I can think of the equivalent of a player being tasered live on the pitch as his whole body collapsed right in front of us. I think I'd asked him about 2 minutes before, like, how are you feeling physically? And we had asked him to do like a standard thumbs up if everything's okay. Halfway, if it's kind of getting a little bit, kind of
Getting
worrying, and then obviously
technical,
thumbs
this.
down.
It's getting very technical, this, isn't it?
Yeah, this is not advanced level communication here, people. But yeah, I think 2 minutes before he was kind of like this. And within 2 minutes, my God, his body just said, no, you're not playing in the championship anymore today. But yeah, I think when you're bringing in those players and in that period, they're having to adapt. As you say, you can do all the running and all the games you want in preseason. And then you meet the intensity of the season. And you're going to have to start allowing them to get experience of that 60, 70 minutes, but then they're trying to get rhythm. They're trying to build up that cohesion within the team, because it's not just about fitness and tactics, is it? The players have to learn to play with each other. And then is 10 games enough for that to have almost manifested itself? You, as a manager, will also be trying to work out, well, this player seems to be playing well in this position. Some players obviously have an optional or a number of positions that they could fill in, and then you're playing with who suits the system you want to play, or is the system built for other players to be more expressive, whatever that might be. On the physical side, 6 games in, we were definitely having a review of whether we think we're up to speed. By 10 games, it's now, do we need to do a lot different? Have those new players really adapted as well as they can? Because by the first international break, they haven't really had long enough. By the second international break, and we're 10 games deep, now we know whether people are going to be able to cope for the season. The players who've got to this point are mostly going to probably go on and have good seasons and be largely injury free, aren't they? The people who've got injured potentially once or twice before this, they're real concerns, and you're probably starting to turn an eye to, I can't really rely on this player for the season.
I think that's a challenge, isn't it? And I think also, we spoke about it, and it's interesting for fans to judge new players because sometimes you can have a player that's, 2 days before the transfer window shuts, so 3 or 4 games into the season, and he's coming from a different league, he's coming from a different country, he's stuck in an apartment somewhere, wherever that club might be. Often his family or his girlfriend or his kids or whatever that might be are not over with him. And you've probably got up until around this period where it's just all happened so fast. So I think the expectation for someone to play their best football and settle in brilliantly is actually unfair and unusual. But of course, you want to try and get that player into the team. You're right. You get to this point and you start to look now, okay, the player that we thought we were hoping could have an injury free season has already picked up a couple of little niggles and missed 4 or 5 games. Now you're starting to think, like you said, do we have to start to think about maybe not starting them or not building the team around them? And it's a cruel industry, isn't it? It's a horrible industry for that. But sometimes you have to think, how can we get a consistent performance out of a team? And you get to this point of the season, 10 games in, where you start to look, all right, how many games has he played now? How many minutes has he played? How many games have we won with that player in the team? That's something I would always look for patterns after 10 games, that's all. So you're comparing your first 10 games of this season. Actually, probably thinking about it, you probably should just compare it to the first 10 games of last season. But what you
Yeah.
tend to do is you tend to compare it to the average of the 46 games of last season. So are we having more possession? Are we making more entries in the final third? Are we creating more chances? Is our I hate saying it, Dave, but is our XG a bigger number than previously, or our XGA a bigger number than previously? So
Yeah.
but you're looking at some of those main metrics, and we would probably have about 6 technical metrics that we would really hang our hat on and judge our performance. Of course, there's lots more that we would look at, but they would be the main ones because you can't look at 50 metrics, I don't think, in great detail. And
Yeah.
then we would also look at the physical side, wouldn't we? All right, are we hitting? Well, you tell me, what would we look for in a 10-game sort of report? Because I would say to someone like yourself, wouldn't I, Dave, do me a favour, do me a 10-game report on where you think we are physically in comparison to last season. And I'm praying, and you're praying, that this looks better than last season's average. But what would you do? How would you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some of the metrics that surround the match as such, which is how many players have we had available for you to be able to pick from? Because that's obviously a key thing. We know that the more successful teams have better player availability. So giving you more options to put into the team, have on the bench, potentially even leaving out of the squad is vital if we're going to have a successful season. The types of injuries that we're having, are they small? Are they based on contact related? Are they happening in matches where, of course, the type of injuries that we get can be a little bit different because you have players flying into tackles. You see a lot more contusions, dead legs, tackle related injuries. So there are two key ones really. Outside of that, then, are we building into the season? Because we know at the start, okay, that maybe the first game and the second game, the first home and away game, you'll just see some strange kind of physical metrics where teams just go hell for leather on the first days of the season. But then you start to settle in and start to see, well, what's our capability and our capacity to last well in games, to cover the distances that we expect, because it's not necessarily about running further, is it? It's about how you expect your team to run and physically perform in the games. And we'd have certain key things that we'd be looking for in our teams, like how well they sprint, how well we transition and how fast, how quickly we get from potentially a compact shape into big open spaces where everybody moves fast up the pitch. And we'd want to see that we're able to recover really well. not only within games from all those kind of high intensity stuff that we want to do, but how well are we recovering as we start to go into the first kind of midweek games? Because we've probably had about 2 or 3 matches now midweek. Are we recovering well between those games and able to then perform at the levels that we want? And pretty much by 10 games, we know whether we've got the players with the capacity or our program has given those players the capacity to do that, which means you can now, the next period between kind of 10 and 20 games is when really the season, we're in the meat of the season. And that's where you certainly want to make sure that you're at the level that you need to be at to be able to push on for the rest of the season.
I mean, that's a challenge, isn't it? It's not just this 10 games, isn't it? This 10 games is about performances and about getting results, of course, but it's also about preparing because you're on the second international break. We know there's a third one coming before Christmas. And then afterwards you've got one break. So from a performance aspect, we've also got to layer in things that prepare us for the rest of the season, don't we? It's not just about starting well and just concentrating on that. I think also from a technical standpoint, it's interesting because a lot of things can shape these first 10 games. And, it's not just, okay, we're playing. Because again, if you're measuring objectively the data behind the first 10 games performance, technically and also physically, we've got to, of course, take into account, okay, are we playing the same way? Because how many times do you start a season where you think, all right, we've looked at last season, we've measured it, we've thought, how do we adapt to be even better? So, let's just say we finished 8th in the league. Of course, the season after you think, well, we want to get in the top 6. So what do we need to do to get in the top 6? So it might be that we've changed formation. It might be that we've had to take a gamble on being more attacking. And you've seen it recently. So, I mean, for example, look at England's game last night. They're going to pick a really attacking team that everybody talks about. Of course, when we put this out, it won't be last night, but when we've recorded it, it was. But they put a really attacking team out. Everyone gets excited by. But if you look at the chances, goals, shots against, okay, take out the VAR decisions. You go. So if I'm looking at that, and after 10 games of maybe playing that way, I'm thinking, do you know what? We're conceding too many goals. We're conceding too many chances. We're too open on transition. So you now start to go, actually, the data's telling me we're not getting it right. So what do we need to do from a tactical aspect and a technical aspect just to change that? So that 10 games might tell me, but actually what we're trying to do to be better is actually making us worse. And that's happened lots of times for us, hasn't it? Where you try to tweak things, you take a gamble, you shape the team in a certain way, and then after 5 or 6 games, you're maybe going, okay, we've played 4-3-3, and we want our 2-8s to go and run and be a little bit more attacking and freer. And then after 10 games, you think, do you know what, maybe 4-2-3-1 with 2 defenders, 2 defensive midfielders that actually hold our shape and let everyone else go. So there's so many things that 10 games tell you, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what you were trying to do at 0 games to be better than the season. And I think that's important. It's always context, isn't it? It's always why. Why are we not as good in these 10 games and what do we need to do to get better? Or you can do what a lot of people do where they go, this is how we want to play. I don't care whether the metrics are better or worse. I'm going to stick to my principles. And those teams sometimes come through it and actually end up being really, really good. Or other times, those teams languish at the bottom of the table and ultimately the manager probably gets a sack after 12 or 13 games. So there's always context to that 10-game report, essentially, isn't there?
Without a doubt. I think when you look at most teams, would probably have at least 30% of the team that starts the season and is 10 games in different from the team that finished last season. Injuries aside, new recruits coming in, young players who are being given a chance to see whether they have a good preseason and they get a chance to start some games. But for all of that work, you're trying to potentially enhance the playing model or the tactics that you're presenting. So you might have brought in a new fullback or a new midfielder, and they have a new strength that the team previously didn't have. But also that can affect the players around them, which maybe affects their performance. So now somebody new comes in who adds you something else, takes away from somebody else that's in the team, and you're trying to find that balance all the time. So it's a little bit like that old graphic equalizer we would have had on those old stereos. You're trying to push something up a little bit from your attacking defenders as such, but that might take away from the defensive capability of the team because you've tweaked one thing to try and get it better, but actually it has a knock-on effect on making the other thing that you were good at worse. So it's kind of it's a game of Russian roulette really for you as a manager, isn't it? Like, where do I strengthen, but what's the knock-on effect to the rest of the team? And sometimes that again, it just takes time for the team to settle down. However, we know that 10 games in, you're in the start to middle of October, it starts to become that part of the season where managers are held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, managing feels like Russian roulette, Dave. You're right, but I think it feels like if there's 8 chambers in the gun, it feels like there's 7 bullets at times, and you're dodging one, and you
Yeah.
think, "I'm not going to dodge this for long." But you're right. It's a game of push and pull, isn't it? And it's the same in the performance side of it, isn't it? You're trying to get one thing, but you might lose something else. And every time you're trying to find the perfect balance. And in reality, in football, in such a dynamic, fluid sport, there's never the perfect balance, isn't there? You're just trying to find each game and the way around it, and I suppose the consistent elements to it. I think also, I think, yeah, as a manager, I think you understand that. I think you understand the season, you understand the international breaks, like we said right at the start of this episode. But when you get to that second international break, I don't know it'd be interesting to look at the statistics. I don't know what the statistics are, but I would imagine that a lot of clubs essentially do their own little bit of an audit. Whether that's just how's the team doing, are the fans happy, do we look like we're advancing, do we look like we're going in the right direction, or if we're not, do we think we can get out? Are we confident we can get out of where we're at? Because it's a good point of a season, 10 games, isn't it, or however many games in this second international break to start to think, or 8 or 9 games, to start to think, okay, where are we? Do we need to make a change to give someone a little bit more time? Do we need to change in the international break essentially because they then get 2 weeks to work with some of the team? So I think this sort of 10 game period is crucial. I think also it's not just crucial for players because we always focus on the team on the pitch, but actually sometimes you might have had some new stuff come into the building, and you might have been working in a different way. So that 10 games gives you a chance to go, okay, well, what are we doing there? So how's our analysis department working? Are we happy with the way that flow is? There's a chance for them to create a report. Okay, guys, what do you think we need, and how do you think we're doing after 10 games? So we would always say have a medical report when we would ask for a medical report after 10 games. We'd ask for a performance report. We'd ask for a technical report from the analysts. We'd ask for a coaching report in terms of those individual players. And we might also sit down with the players and gauge feedback from maybe the leadership group, or, we spoke about some players that are maybe new in the team. Okay, how have you found it? It might be an opportunity to sit down with them and say, how have you found it? How have you settled? How are your family? Can we help you with that? Because actually this next 10 games is going to shape a lot of the season now. It's such. Why do we do it after 10 games? It's funny, isn't it? Because it's a round number. We would tend to use 10 games, wouldn't we?
Well,
What?
generally speaking, it's always right in the middle of this international break. Like
Yeah,
speaking now in 2024 for the people who are listening in the future, it's early October. We've played 9 games in the league. We've potentially had a couple of cup games, depending on how you've gone there. So you're around that number anyway. It's
yeah,
also quite interesting, as we just mentioned before. It's midway between two windows, and there's a break in this period and there's a break coming up. So if there is going to be work to be done, you've probably going to see some of the fruits of that labor in the next 6 games, or kind of, if it's not going well, the pressure ramps even more. And we do know that obviously clubs look at these two international breaks as kind of being really key periods. If you've had a slow start to the season, you've got probably one more go to kickstart it, and this 10 game in. What can we do to get us to the next international break and be better? But also for the clubs, they know that January is coming up, and if they are in a precarious situation, they might have to recruit differently than if you're in a really positive situation, which is all great because you can now really kick on, because we're now getting to the point where there's enough points on the table that you can still kind of move up relatively quickly. After 15, 20 games, a win may bring you up only about 2 or 3 places, whereas later on in the season, you may not move at all for a win. So if you want to climb that table quicker, maybe these are the periods that clubs look at and say, this is the time to make a change. And maybe after 10 games, you've had enough time.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. And as a manager, head coach, but you're aware of that as well, aren't you? Like if you look at let's take League One for example. You could be a
Yep.
team. I looked the other day, and I think it might have been before the weekend's games, but I think someone like Rotherham were 17th in the league, but they were 3 points off the playoffs. And so if you look at the spread of points in that division, it is absolutely incredible. So you could be, if you just simply looked at the table, I'm using Rotherham as an example. I might be factually incorrect there, but whoever it is, a team, 17, 3 points off the playoffs. Now, you could be sat there going, oh, we're 17th. That's not a good position. We shouldn't be there. We were in the championship last season. But you win the next 2 games and you could be in third or you could be in fourth. Do you know what I mean? It's so you're right. There is an element of common sense at this stage of a season that a win or two can actually change completely the way you feel, which is why it's important not to panic. It's important. But at the same time, if you're sat at the bottom of a table on 4 points, for example, now, and the playoffs are on 17 points, then you're already in a bit of a relegation dogfight, aren't you, after 8 or 9 games? Or you're at least thinking, well, the best we're probably going to do is mid-table. Well, 9 games ago, 6 weeks ago, you probably sat there thinking we should get in the playoffs. It's amazing how a poor start of a season can really define your ambitions and actually change what you're trying to achieve. And actually change maybe the way you might have to shape the team. Like you said, in January, you might go from a team trying to get in the playoffs to a team actually thinking about, we need to get a little bit more toughness in the team or whatever it might be, leadership or whatever it might be, experience to get us out of this position that we're in. Whereas if you're mid-table, maybe you can recruit in a very different way. So I'm not suggesting you would change your model at the drop of a hat after 8 or 9 games, but there are subtle differences that, having 3 points or having 18 points are going to make to the way that you perhaps perceive the next 10 games or the January window. So you're right. It's an interesting scenario. And also, if you're an owner, we all know how it works. If you're an owner sat there and you've had those aspirations and you're sat there now after 9 games, 10 games with 2 weeks to mull it over, and your manager's won 1 game out of those 9, I've got to be honest, if I'm that manager, I'm sat there thinking, I might not survive this international break. And that is just a reality of the business. That is a reality of where you are. You hope you do. You hope you have a chance to explain why you think, lack of fitness, performance
Of
team
course,
hasn't done their job properly. It's not
get them out.
not the tactics. Let's make some changes to the stuff. but you
Get
but
them out before they get you out, I think is the phrase, isn't it? But you make a great point. So we've talked about
buckets.
sorry?
We're running out of buckets.
There are no more buckets. All of our buckets have got all of the holes in them. But so we've talked about kind of the internal review that we would do within the departments or football departments. But obviously you must have, as a head coach, you must have to go to a board meeting. There must be kind of some deeper conversations outside of maybe your day-to-day interactions that you might have with a sporting director or a chief exec. There obviously are the more formal sides to football clubs, which is when they sit down and sit with you and go, what is your take on where we are and where we're going? How do they manifest themselves? Are they challenging? Are they people who generally sit in those meetings who are understanding, or are they looking for answers?
Yeah, it's interesting. Different ways of doing it at different clubs, and in some ways, it surprises me that not every club does this. But you're right. You would have a technical. You would have what's usually known as a technical board meeting, um, probably once a month on average at most clubs. Now, if I think back to Burton, we wouldn't have done that because you wouldn't have had a technical board for starters. So that helps. You are the
You
tech.
were the technical board.
You were the technical board meeting. How are you doing? Doing really well. Keep going. Carry on. Yeah, and that's me talking in the mirror. So and then at Birmingham, for example, we used to have that technical board meeting, and one thing I could remember them doing it was, okay, how do you see this next batch of games? And it was really interesting. Or how have you found the last batch of games? How do you see the next batch? So I suppose the club have got an opportunity to get your feeling on, and also some sort of benchmarking of where you think you can be. And obviously, they can then essentially not use that, but they can use that to see how you've done and whether you've actually underachieved or overachieved around your own personal opinion. And the key members of staff, all of them could give their opinion on that. Now, then at other clubs, it's just been a general chit chat about where we are and players. And, it hasn't necessarily been what do you think you can do? How many points do you think you can have? Derby was quite similar. You used to sit down with Mel, the owner, and it would be, okay, well, what points do you think you're going to get for the next period? And again, I'm not suggesting that's the right way to do it because it shouldn't always be outcome based, but essentially, you do need to, as a manager, have some sort of accountability, of course. And in a way, the fact that you're bored and you are talking about it and you're trying to actually work together and shape what maybe you need to do to improve or whatever that is, I think is better than just sweeping it under the carpet and hoping. Of course, we're not hoping it's going to get better, but at least there's an understanding of, okay, what challenges have you got? How can we help you? That's what a strong board should do, in my opinion. A strong club should do. It should be, how do you think you've done? Where can we support you? What changes do you think you might need to make? And where do you see the next sort of period of games? And then, like I said, you're then essentially accountable. And I think we've both done the same thing. We've always been happy to put it out there how we think we're doing, put it out there how we think we can improve, and then be accountable for that. I think most managers and most staff will understand if you're a head of a department and your department's not working properly, then essentially you have to take the responsibility for that, don't you? And I think that's always the same. So those board meetings can be, I've got to be honest, if you're turning up on the back of a very bad run of form, there's a little bit of you thinking, I could do without this board meeting really, but you've got to do it. It's like everyone can take a call off your owner on a Saturday night after the game if you've won 3-0. Everyone's looking forward to that call. No one's looking forward to the call when you've lost 3-0 because you don't want to be in that position. You want to be able to say that you're doing well and you want to be able to share the owner's excitement. And nobody wants to do that. But of course, you're all in it together and you're a team. And hopefully those conversations go that way. But they're never nice if you're on a bad run of form. They're always fantastic if you're doing really. If you're third in the league and you go to one of those meetings, I'm going in with a glass of wine with my feet up. If I'm not, I'm thinking, oh my god, I've got to get ready for some tough conversations. But that's the industry, that's the game.
Yeah, they are tricky conversations, aren't they? But you bring us on to a great pivot point there, which is we've looked at the negative side of 10 games where it's like looking over your shoulder and you're a bit concerned. But what if you've started great? You're flying, you're near the top of the league and everybody's buoyant. But is there then a concern maybe with you as a manager thinking, I've got to keep this going. The pressure might be up now to maintain this, but also making sure people don't get complacent.
Yeah, I think I look at back as being a player first. So being a player was great in that position. I remember at Leicester once, we were top of the Premier League after 10 games. Right, this was under Peter Taylor the first season. We played Man United away at Old Trafford, and you now everyone's talking about this is the top of the table. Of course, you know it's not a real top of the table clash, and we got absolutely pumped 2-0, but it could have been like 5-0. And at that point, you realise, okay, so maybe we are in a slightly false position. But nevertheless, you know that if you're top of the league and after 10 games, you can have one or two bad results, and you're still in there with a shout. So as a club like Leicester in the Premier League at the time, it was maybe not, we've had a good start, but actually now this gives us an opportunity to just try and cling on to those positions for a little bit longer. And of course, gives you that confidence. As a manager, I don't think you're ever, it's funny actually, because we're talking about it as though starting badly is terrible and starting well is brilliant. And the reality is you're always somewhere in between. We know that. Like when you're winning, you're always worried about that. What if you start losing? How do we maintain that performance? What do we need to do to maintain that performance? And if you're losing, of course, it's okay. What do we need to do to get out of this? And I suppose the dynamic's similar in some ways. We're all looking for that continuity of work, aren't we? That continuity of performance where we know that some of the things have to be the same. We need to be consistent with that training intensity or that training volume, and sometimes when you're winning, actually, it's more of a challenge because we've seen it, haven't we, where maybe you want to come off the players a little bit because, we're winning. Let's not maybe push those runs on a Tuesday, or let's maybe not have that intensity to the session. Let's maybe cut Tuesday short a little bit, or maybe let's not do the extra work on a Thursday. And sometimes that's the challenge. But when you start so well, the challenge now is making sure the players understand it. How many times have we won a game and we've said, listen, we might have won, we might be in a great position, but actually, we've got to make sure we do this every week. And so I don't think anyone ever enjoys those winning runs. As a manager, you don't. You're just there, and it creates a great opportunity for momentum. It creates a great feeling in the training ground, but at the same time, you have to guard against what's next, and you have to guard it because how many staff we've seen it before with staff. Staff start getting complacent. Staff maybe start being a little bit more relaxed with some of the things because we're winning and because we're top of the league or whatever it is. How have you found those challenges from a performance perspective when the players think they can get away with a little bit more when you're winning, or does it actually motivate them to want to do the extra bits of work and just get on with it?
That's when you see the professionals come forward, the ones who are really, really good because they stick to doing what they've done. It's that word you said, consistency. They just know what's got them into this position where they're performing well. They know they don't necessarily need to do anything extra or different, just maintain what you're doing. So they're pretty good. It's the people who've not really experienced it too often. Like let's say, for example, you're at a club that traditionally it hasn't been at the top end of the table, it maybe struggled for a fair few seasons, and suddenly it feels like, wow, this is utopian world. We're not looking over our shoulder all the time. So, as you say, everyone feels that pressure lift. However, that's where, unfortunately, someone like me has to be the Grinch who stole Christmas and try and push to maintain standards, and high standards. Like everyone can have standards which are suboptimal, they're available on every corner shop, but finding people who want to maintain high standards and keep pushing you. How many times have I had to kind of nudge you, like you just said there, about sticking to doing the things that have got us to where we are when it feels like when there's a shout from the back of having extra days off, actually extra days off is not what we need here. Other times they are going to be the right thing, but actually, you know what, those teams that have done things well have maintained consistent high levels of what they do all of the time, and they don't let those kind of subjective feelings of, everything going really, really well to get in the way of what got them to where they've got. So yeah, you're kind of battling against kind of swimming against the tide is probably another water analogy that we could use here. We've had buckets, but yeah, swimming upstream against everyone else who thinks more time off or do things different. Let's just have a fun Monday, just doing nothing that's serious. But actually, sometimes that's not the right thing to do, is it?
Have a fun Monday. I knew I should have. Anyone who listened to the previous episode, I knew I should have chucked that bleep test tape in dressing room 101 because on that Monday morning, I'm trying to go. Let's have a fun five-a-side, Dave. And Dave sat there in the office saying, "No, we need to do the bleep test because we need a measurement of how fit the players are after 10 games." So
It's not party time here, like it's not all that.
where the hell have you got that from? So I
Don't
think
ask.
I think that but look, that is a reality, isn't it? Me and you would be sat in the office. We'd probably let's say it's a Monday morning. We've played 10 games. We're now driving in. You're driving in from Norfolk. I'm driving in from Derbyshire, wherever we are, and maybe we've got 3 hours in the car. And you're ringing me at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, what should we do today? We know what we're going to do. And I'm saying, well, maybe, we're doing really well, Dave. Maybe, and you're saying, I think we need to go more. And that's a conversation that often we would have, wouldn't it? And it's finding that balance of we need to keep pushing the players. Sometimes that winning feeling early on in the season gives players a chance to change their mentality, change the way they feel. And actually, we would often use that as, look, we're in a great position. We've got to kick on. We're not looking at surviving in this division. We're looking at getting out of a division. And of course, sometimes you have to. We've spoke about it before, haven't we? It's easy to try and be loved as a member of staff, but actually, sometimes being unpopular but respected because you don't cut corners is actually, the most important thing to do on a Monday when everyone wants to actually slack off a little bit. We're talking about scenarios. We're not suggesting that we're going in on a Monday giving players an extra 2 days off just because we've won a few games after 10. But it's a possibility. So yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? The challenge is always shaping what do we need to do next? How can we push the players to uncomfortable areas that they don't normally want to get into? Because we know how it works. Sometimes players want a nice week, don't they? Players want a comfortable week. Players want to come off the hard work just for a second to be able to breathe. But actually, sometimes going in and making them work a little bit harder and asking more of them and asking them to be more professional, is going to put you in a much better position after the next 10 games, isn't it? And those conversations that we would have driving in or stuck in traffic on a Monday morning would usually work around some of those things, wouldn't they? So the work isn't just at 9 o'clock in the morning, is it? 24/7,
No way.
we'd be talking about what do we need to do to improve along with other members of staff.
Yeah, and I think we come to a real interesting part of the discussion where we've obviously discussed about the amount of managerial changes that happen in this period. You're also having had a good start. You need someone. You can't be like the guys on the Titanic who don't have the binoculars out looking into the distance.
This
You
is
have to
water.
spot
This is so water based, Dave.
the water base. Yeah, do
Yes.
you like it?
You've got on one now, haven't you? Go
There's
on.
a theme, but yeah, you're looking for the icebergs ahead, aren't you? Just because you've started well, you probably know, like this season, as you've talked about, you've got a Luton and maybe a Coventry who've had tougher starts to the season. You'll have other teams in other divisions, like you mentioned, Rotherham, who've had an unexpected start to the season, but you know that the quality is there, and you know that at some stage when they get it together, they're going to push back up to the division. And if you're a team that started kind of abnormally well, call it, the risk is that you take your foot off the pedal and you stop scanning into the horizon and doing the right things. And that's ultimately going to sink you, isn't it? It's going to end up with your season falling away into disappointment. Um, And that's even riskier because you can start poorly and start getting it together and it looks like it's being rescued and turned around. But if you start well and then that seems to falter, bigger questions are asked about why did it go wrong as opposed to how did you turn it round. I think that becomes the biggest challenge then in the end of the 10 game review is you need to know where you're going to be going next and not fall foul of whatever kind of obstacles are going to come in your way that could derail your season.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, I was trying to think of football names with water in them. So I came up with Blackpool, Motherwell. So
Mark Rivers.
I know you're talking about players now, yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
if our listeners have any more water-based teams or players, and that would be fantastic to hear them. But yeah, you are you're looking at you're trying to predict. We spoke about it before. Part of our job is trying to predict what might happen next. Trying to see. The data might be good, or the 10 game feeling of a team might be good, but actually you might start saying, oh, okay, well, let's say a young player's come into the team and he started fantastically well for 10 games. But he's never played more than 10 games in the first team environment. So is he going to start to drop off after 15 games? Or do we need extra support for him? Or do we need to take him out for a game or two to then allow him to then kick on again? So there's so many challenges around, what's next, isn't there? What could be a challenge next? The other thing, of course, sometimes you might play a different way. And after 10 games, teams start to look at that and actually, you might start to become a bit more predictable as a team. So, we've had it before where we're very good at certain things and teams start to stop that happening. And if one team stops it, it's amazing that the next team then go and look at all your games and go, well, actually, we'll do the same,
Yeah.
and we'll do the same. And so suddenly you start to get a pattern developing where and I know good teams find different ways to solve those problems, of course, and you're always trying to do that. But there are times when your team has certain strengths and other teams work out how to negate them in certain ways. And actually, you've now got a different challenge. You might have started well, but you've now got game 11 and 12 where all of a sudden that challenge is different. So you have to predict that. You have to think, what if someone does that? What's our plan B or what's our plan C? Because let's be honest, most of the time, you can have one idea of how to play, but you're very fortunate if you're so good at that way of playing that you never have to change or you never have to adjust or you never have to find a slightly different way to solve the problem. So yeah, I think, and that's why I suppose when I said you can't really relax even when you're doing well as a manager, because you're always thinking of a next challenge, aren't you? You're always thinking of what might come next. Um, I always say football's a game of high level problem solving, isn't it? All the time. In terms of what we both do, and you're always trying to think about the next move. If that's chess, you're thinking about the next move. So it's an interesting scenario after 10. I think 10 games is a really important part of the season because it's probably the hardest bit to predict or the hardest period to predict. I think once you get to 20, 30, your team probably is what it is, more or less, whereas 10 games is actually quite a lot of different changes within that period. So there'll be so many managers out there now looking at their team thinking, I'm not sure that we've got enough in the locker. I'm not sure that we're creative enough, or the formation we're not keeping enough clean sheets, or actually we've started really well and what we're doing. I think I really like that. I think we've got to keep going, or whatever it is. But there'll be mixed feelings up and down the country in dressing rooms. So yeah, there'll be one or two fearing they might not make the next game, and there'll be quite a few thinking actually I've given myself the next 10 games because we've started so well.
Yeah, well, I think might come on to that on a pretty close podcast to come. One of the next episodes, I think we'll look at as such the sacking season because over the last 5 years, we've probably seen up to 8 managers in the championship having left their position by October. So 25% of the way through the season, we've seen 25% of the managers change in the division. Now that's kind of held over the last 5 years. Not so many this year, interestingly enough, but it's certainly one to reflect on. You know, that kind of sacking season, because sometimes you just need the first domino to fall, and then you just see a lot of other clubs because. Going back over the whole episode that we've just talked about, you're going to have some people who've overperformed. You're going to have some teams that are going to be underperforming, and you want to be in that kind of category where you know you started well and you've got more to come, rather than being, looking over your shoulder and thinking, wow, I could be in trouble, or my team could be in trouble, or both.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of when I've left clubs. So I think if you think about it, I left Burton for Birmingham in October. So their manager must have got sacked in October. I actually left Birmingham, I think, around October, November. So that was a similar time.
Yep,
I left Millwall in October. But that obviously wasn't a sacking. But nevertheless, it's still around some of these parameters that we're talking about. And
yep,
Stoke, I think, was January. So yeah, it's actually, it would be interesting to see, and it'd be interesting in that episode to think about why, exactly why do managers end up leaving? What are some of those scenarios around it? And actually, they'd be very different as well, wouldn't they? We've seen that in the
yep.
championship over the years, that sometimes someone could be doing a fantastic job, and still lose their job because the club wants to go down a different route. So yeah, look forward to that one.
Well, a great discussion there on the 10-game review and the start of the season. So let's see how teams come back after this international break, whether people kick on, whether people start doing anything different. But yeah, great discussion. Thanks for that, guys.
Thanks, mate.